5 fearful Wendigo versus Skinwalker stories. The deepest woods hold older laws. Laws written not by man, but by hunger and shadow. Among the most feared entities of these forgotten places are the Wendigo and the Skinwalker. 1. A monstrous embodiment of insatiable famine born from cannibalism and the bitter cold. The other, a shape-shifting witch, a cruel mimic that wears the skin of the living. Their stories are often whispered together, but their evils are distinct. What you are about to hear are 5 first-hand accounts from those who walked into the wilderness and found something wearing it. They insisted, as we do, that every chilling word is true. Story 1. Our first story comes from a man we'll call Thomas. He was 28 years old at the time, a surveyor for a logging company in the vast, remote forests of northern Ontario. My name's Thomas. I'm a surveyor by trade. Was, anyway. I don't do field work anymore. I'm a see it to believe it kind of person. My whole job was about facts, measurements, tangible things. Ghost stories were for campfires, not for professional grown men. That changed in the fall of 2018. The company had a contract to map a tract of old-growth forest so deep, the only way in was by helicopter. My partner, Mike, and I were dropped off for a 10-day stint. It was beautiful, in a severe kind of way. A cathedral of pine and spruce, so thick it felt like perpetual twilight on the forest floor. The air smelled of damp earth and resin. It was silent, too. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy one, like the woods were holding their breath. The unease started on the 3rd night. We'd finished at the base camp and were turning in. That's when we heard the first wood knock. A loud, solid crack against a tree trunk, maybe 50 yards out. Not a natural branch fall. Something with force behind it. Mike shrugged it off. Probably a damn porcupine, he said. I wanted to believe him. Then it came again, closer. And again, answering from a different direction. A conversation. We shut off our lanterns and just listened. That's when the smell hit us. It drifted on the cold night air. Not animal musk, not rot, but something in between. Like spoiled meat and wet, moldering fur. It made your stomach turn. The next few days, the feeling of being washed was a physical weight on my neck. Our equipment started acting up. The laser rangefinders would give wild, impossible readings. The GPS would flicker and die in clearings. Mike got quieter, jumpier. On the 7th day, he radioed in a false emergency. Said he'd broken his ankle. The chopper came and took him. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he left. I was alone. That's when the real stalking began. I'd see movement at the edge of my vision. A tall, gray shape slipping behind a tree. I'd hear footsteps keeping perfect pace with mine, just off the trail. Then the mimicry started. On the 9th night, huddled in my tent, I heard Mike's voice call from right outside the flap. Thomas? My ankle's okay. I came back. Let me in. It's freezing. It sounded exactly like him. But the radio was dead silent, and I'd watched the chopper become a speck on the horizon. My blood went to ice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The final morning, I saw it. I was packing up the last of my gear at the extraction point, the clearing where the chopper was due in an hour. The tree line was about 30 yards away. It stepped out from behind a giant cedar. It stood on 2 legs, but it was all wrong. It was emaciated, terrifyingly thin, with skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame that looked gray and leathery. But its height, it had to be 9 feet tall. Its head was elongated, like a stag's skull stripped of antlers, but with a jaw that hung open too wide. And its eyes, they were sunk deep in their sockets, black and shiny like chips of obsidian, burning with a kind of sharp, malicious intelligence. It wasn't a beast. It was a thing wearing a famine. It didn't charge. It just watched me, its head tilted, bird-like. Then, it took one long, deliberate step towards the clearing. I froze, pure primal terror rooting me to the spot. It took another step, its movements unnaturally fluid for something so gaunt. It was testing, seeing if I'd run. I fumbled for my flare gun, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I fired it into the air between us. The brilliant red light and the whoosh made it flinch, recoiling back a step into the shadows. It let out a sound then, not a roar, but a dry, rasping hiss that crackled like static and dead leaves. I spent the longest 40 minutes of my life with my back against the supply crate, flare gun pointed at the tree line, crying without making a sound. When the chopper finally descended, the pilot later said he saw a tall, gray figure retreating into the woods, moving on all fours with a speed that didn't seem possible. I never went back. I quit the company a month later. I can't stand the cold now. I get panic attacks in grocery stores near the meat section. That smell. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a sick moose. It was a Wendigo. It was waiting out there. And it was hungry. A being of starvation, recognizing its own in the loneliness of a man. Our second story shifts the geography and the horror from the frozen north to the arid mesas of the southwest, where the deception is not of famine, but of familiarity. Story 2. This account comes from a woman named Lena, a 35-year-old nurse who grew up on the Navajo Nation. She carries a cultural understanding of these things that only deepened her terror. I'm Lena. I'm a community health nurse. I was raised by my grandparents in a very traditional way. They taught me the stories, the protocols, the warnings. You don't speak of certain things at night. You don't whistle after dark. You show respect. I believed in the teachings, but as a modern woman, a medical professional, I suppose I held some things at an intellectual distance, until it touched my family. It happened 2 summers ago. My grandfather, our Hastoy, was very sick. We knew he was nearing the end. I was driving back to my mother's house from the clinic very late, maybe 2 a.m. The road is long, empty, and cuts between these high, red sandstone walls. The moon was full, casting everything in a pale, blue-white light. I first saw the coyote standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, expecting it to run. It didn't. It just stood there, watching my car approach. As my headlights washed over it, I saw its eyes. They weren't the reflective green of a coyote. They were a dull, almost human brown. And it was smiling, not a canine pant. A knowing, cruel stretch of its lips. A cold dread settled in my chest. I tapped the horn. Instead of running, it rose up. It didn't just stand on its hind legs. It rearranged itself, its spine straightening with a series of sickening, wet pops I could hear through my closed window. It was my grandfather's height, my grandfather's build. Then it started to walk towards my driver's side door. Its gait was wrong, a stiff, jerky imitation of a man's walk, with the front paws dangling like limp hands. I was frozen, just staring. It stopped by my window, and that's when the smell filled the car. It was like hot copper, dry dust, and something sweetly rotten, like old flowers left in a vase too long. It leaned down. The face was still coyote, but the expression, it was my grandfather's kind, weary expression. And then it spoke. In my grandfather's voice, the exact gravelly tone, the slight catch in his throat from his illness. It said, "Lena, my girl, why are you out so late? I'm cold. Let me in." Every cell in my body screamed. This was a violation of nature, of love, of memory. The teachings flooded back. Do not look at it. Do not listen. Do not let it in. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The tires screeched, and I felt a thump as the car lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the road, on 2 legs, that horrible smile back on its canine face. It wasn't chasing. It was just watching me flee. I drove straight to my mother's, sobbing. I ran inside, babbling. My mother's face went ashen. She didn't question me. She knew. She made me take a shower with cedar ash. She prayed. We stayed up until dawn, all the lights on. At first light, she got the call. My grandfather had passed peacefully in his sleep at 2:15 a.m. The thing on the road had been wearing his skin before he was even cold. I don't drive that road at night anymore. I moved my clinic hours. The rational part of my mind tries to explain it as grief and stress, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. It wasn't my grandfather. It was a skinwalker, and it knew exactly how to hurt me the most. It didn't want my flesh. It wanted my fear, my grief. And it got it. A predator that feeds not on meat, but on the soul's most tender wounds. Our third story returns us to the northern forests, where the lines between these two ancient terrors begin to blur in the most horrifying way. Story 3. This account comes from Jake, a 42-year-old long-haul trucker who took a fateful detour through the back roads of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Name's Jake. I drive an 18-wheeler. Have for 20 years. You see a lot of weird things on the night roads, but you chalk it up to fatigue, tricks of the light. I was a skeptic. Not anymore. This was last November. A blizzard shut down the main interstate, so my GPS rerouted me onto a network of old logging roads through the Ottawa National Forest. Big mistake. The snow was coming down thick, my rig was struggling, and around midnight, I hit a patch of black ice. The trailer jackknifed, gentle-like, but it slid me right off the road into a deep ditch. I was stuck, good and proper. No cell service. Just me, the cab, and a howling wilderness. I ran the engine for heat, but I had to conserve diesel. I'd run it for 20 minutes, then shut it off for 40, sitting in the silent, freezing dark. During the second silent period, I saw the light. A flicker deep in the trees. Another person? A cabin? Hope flared. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, pulled on my coat, and decided to try and reach it. It couldn't have been more than a few hundred yards in. The woods were dead quiet. No wind, no animals. Just the crunch of my boots in the fresh powder. That's when I heard the crying. It was a child, a little girl, sobbing and calling, "Help me. I'm lost." It's so cold. It came from the direction of the light. My heart just about broke. I started hurrying, calling out, "I'm coming. Stay where you are." I burst into a small clearing. There was no child, no cabin, just a single, gnarled old pine with a hollow at its base. And the smell? God, the smell. Like a slaughterhouse dumpster in the middle of summer. Metallic, putrid. The light I'd seen was a faint, sickly phosphorescence coming from inside that tree hollow. And the crying, it changed. It melted into a low, guttural, chittering laughter. I swung my flashlight beam around. That's when I saw it, watching me from the other side of the clearing. It was crouched on all fours, but its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way. It was skinny, ribs showing through patchy, mangy fur that was caked with ice and dirt. Its head was a nightmare mix, the elongated snout of a wolf, but the ears were too pointed, and its mouth was full of yellowed, needle-like teeth that were too numerous. But its eyes, they were pale, almost milky white, and they glowed in my flashlight beam with a cunning, hungry intelligence. It wasn't just an animal, and it wasn't just wrong. It felt ancient and starving. It tilted its head, mimicking my own confused gesture from moments before. Then it spoke, not in a child's voice, but in a perfect imitation of my own dispatcher, Chuck. "Jake," it rasped in Chuck's familiar drawl. "We got a tow coming. Stay with the rig." The words were right, but the tone was dripping with mockery. It was playing with me. I stumbled backwards, my boots slipping in the snow. It didn't charge. It just padded slowly to the side, cutting off my direct route back to the road. It was hurting me. I saw other shapes then, moving in the trees behind it. Taller, thinner, standing on two legs. They were silent. The one in front, the mimic, was the scout. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and ran not for the road, but deeper into the woods, parallel to it. I heard it lope after me, not with the frenzy of a chase, but with the easy, terrifying confidence of something that knows you can't get away. I ran until my lungs burned. Then I climbed the first climbable tree I found, a sturdy oak. I sat up there, shaking violently, for 6 hours until dawn began to gray the sky. The thing circled below me for most of the night. It would disappear, and then I'd hear Chuck's voice calling from different directions, or the little girl's sobs, or even the sound of a tow truck engine. At one point, it stood up on its hind legs, stretched to an impossible height, and just stared up at me with those milky eyes, saliva freezing on its chin. When the sun finally rose, it was gone. I climbed down, half dead with cold, and found my way back to the rig. By some miracle, a DNR plow came by 2 hours later and pulled me out. I never reported what I saw. What would I say? I don't know if it was a skinwalker learning new tricks or a Wendigo that had learned to talk. All I know is it was a liar, and it wanted me off that road and into those woods for a reason. I still drive, but I let my rig rot on the interstate before I take another back road in snow country. A hunter that uses hope as bait and voices as lures. Our fourth story descends into the claustrophobic darkness beneath the earth, where an old mining legend proves to be a terrifying truth. Story 4. This account comes from Marcus, a 50-year-old geologist and avid caver, who explored a sealed-off mine shaft in the mountains of Colorado. I'm Marcus. I have a PhD in geology and over 30 years of responsible caving experience. I don't believe in superstition. I believe in strata, in mineral composition, in the logical history of the earth. That changed in the summer of 2019. My team and I had received permission to survey the Whisper Drift, an abandoned silver mine closed in the 1890s after a series of incidents. The local legends were colorful. Talk of men disappearing, of voices echoing from tapped-out veins, of a cold breath that snuffed lanterns. We dismissed it as Victorian-era ghost stories, likely born from gas leaks and cave-ins. The mine entrance was a jagged mouth in the mountainside, sealed by a rusted iron grate we had to cut through. The air inside was stale, cold, and heavy. We proceeded with all standard safety protocols: helmets, lights, communication lines. The main shaft descended at a sharp angle, supported by ancient, groaning timbers. The first oddity was the bones. Not old mining accidents, but animal bones. Deer, elk, even a bear skull, all piled inside chambers like larders. They were fresh, picked clean, too deep for any natural predator to bring them. My colleague, Sarah, joked it was the mine's guard dog. The joke died in our throats. We reached a large chamber, our headlamps cutting through the absolute black. That's when we heard the first whisper. It was faint, seeming to come from the rock itself. It sounded like, out. We all froze, lamps scanning. Nothing. We chalked it up to the wind in upper shafts. Then it came again, clearer, from a different tunnel. Go out. This time, it was layered. A man's voice, a woman's, a child's, all speaking in unison. A primal alarm bell rang in my head. The smell arrived next. Not damp earth or mold, but the cloying, sweet scent of decay, like rotten meat and honeysuckle. It was wrong, so wrong for that sterile, mineral environment. Our lights began to flicker, not a power failure, but a dimming, as if the darkness was actively swallowing the beams. That's when Sarah screamed. Her light swept across a far niche in the chamber wall. Something was crouched there. It was emaciated, its skin a pallid, grayish white, stretched taut over a frame that was painfully thin yet unnaturally long. It was hairless. Its face was gaunt, with a mouth that seemed cut too wide, and sunken eyes that reflected our lamplight with a faint, reddish gleam. But the most horrifying detail, it was warm. In the 40-degree chill of the mine, we could see a faint, shimmering heat haze coming off its body. It was burning from the inside. It didn't move. It just stared, and it whispered again, this time directly into our minds. It felt like a sibilant hiss. Stay! Panic erupted. We turned to flee back up the passage. Our lights, now mere dim orange glows, caught movement in the tunnel ahead. Another one, taller, standing crookedly where the tunnel was too low for its height, its head cocked at an impossible angle to fit. It was blocking our way. We were trapped between them. The one behind us let out a sound, a dry, rattling inhale like a death rattle in reverse. It was smelling us, tasting our fear. The heat radiating from it grew more intense. I could feel it on the back of my neck. In our terror, we did the only thing we could. We scrambled into a side tunnel, a narrow, descending exploratory drift not on our map. We crawled on hands and knees, the thing ragged, hot breath seeming to follow us. We lost all sense of direction, driven only by the need to get away from that smell, that heat, that whispering. We eventually found an old air shaft, collapsed at the bottom, but with light filtering from far above. We climbed, using our last reserves of strength, fingernails tearing on the rock. We emerged, filthy and hysterical, a mile from our base camp. We never went back for our gear. We sealed the report, citing hazardous atmospheric conditions. I've tried to rationalize it, a shared hallucination from gases, a species of undiscovered subterranean animal. But I can't explain the heat. I can't explain the voices. The legends called it a Wendigo, but this wasn't the frozen north. This was a thing of deep, hot hunger, living in the dark, waiting. I don't go underground anymore. I feel that same trapped feeling now in elevators. I know what waits in the dark, and it's always hungry. A hunger that dwells in the belly of the earth, where light and hope are extinguished. Our fifth and final story brings us to a place where these two curses collide, on a reservation borderland where the old rules are the only things that keep the shadows at bay. Story 5. The final account comes from a man we'll call Daniel, a 24-year-old tribal forestry officer working the border between a protected forest and a remote reservation in Montana. I work for the tribe's forestry service. I grew up with the stories. My grandma, she was a traditionalist. She taught me the prayers, the protections, the differences. The Wendigo is a force of nature, a consumption. The Skinwalker is a person who chose evil. You fight them differently. One, you outlast or avoid. The other, you have to know its name. This happened last winter. I was on a solo patrol, checking for blight in a stand of old pines near the boundary line. It's a place we call the gray zone. Not fully our land, not fully state land. A place of old disputes. Things get lost there. The first day was normal. Cold, clear. I made camp. That night, the noises started. Not just coyotes. This was a cacophony. Owls hooting in the middle of the day. A bull elk bugling in the dead of night, which is seasonally wrong. And laughter. Distant, mocking, human laughter that seemed to move around my campsite in a circle. I kept my fire high and spoke the prayers my grandma taught me. It felt thin, like the words weren't sticking to the air. The second day, I found the first carcass. A mule deer. It wasn't eaten. It was just drained, desiccated, like all the moisture and life had been sucked out of it in an instant. Its eyes were gone, and the sockets were rimed with frost despite the sun. A Wendigo's touch. My blood ran cold. That afternoon, I saw the walker. I was checking a ridge line, and I saw a figure standing by a creek below. It looked like Old Man Turner, a rancher who lived on the state side. But Turner had a bad hip, walked with a pronounced limp. This figure was standing straight, and it was staring right up at me. I raised my binoculars. It was Turner's face, his clothes. But the eyes were all wrong. Yellow, slitted, like a reptile's. It smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. Then it turned and loped into the trees on all fours, moving with a speed no human could match. A skinwalker, wearing a living man's skin. I was caught between two horrors. The Wendigo, a force of consumption freezing everything it touched, and the skinwalker, a trickster wearing my neighbor's face. I realized they weren't working together. They were competing, and I was the prize. That night was the longest of my life. I huddled in my tent, a line of sacred cornmeal and ash across the entrance. The cold became profound, a deep, invasive chill that my fire couldn't touch. My breath plumed thick in the air. That was the Wendigo's approach, the freezing death. Then, from the freezing dark outside, came Turner's voice. "Daniel? Son, you in there? I've got a thermos of coffee. Let me in. It's colder than a witch's kiss out here." The voice was perfect. The cadence, the slight wheeze. But I'd seen those yellow eyes. That was the Skinwalker's game. Deception, invitation. I didn't answer. I clutched my grandmother's turquoise necklace and whispered the old words. The cold intensified. The fabric of my tent began to crackle with frost. The Wendigo was close, its hunger leaching the warmth from my very bones. Suddenly, the Turner voice outside changed. It became a sharp, furious hiss. Mine, it spat. And then I heard a sound I'll never forget. A guttural, roaring challenge that shook the trees, followed by a shrill, chittering snarl. They'd found each other. I peered through a frost-rimmed flap. In the moonlight, I saw them. The Wendigo was a skeletal giant of frost and shadow, its eyes like dying coals. Facing it was the Turner thing, but it was halfway transformed, its body contorted, its jaw distended, those yellow eyes blazing with malice. They clashed. It wasn't a physical brawl like animals. It was a violent disagreement of realities. The air screamed where they met. Shadows writhed. The ground itself seemed to recoil. I didn't wait to see the winner. While those two ancient evils were distracted with each other, I ran. I left everything. My pack, my tent, my rifle. I just ran towards the reservation line, towards home. I could hear the battle raging behind me, sounds that don't belong in this world. I didn't look back. I crossed the boundary marker just as the sun was cracking the horizon. The sound ceased instantly. The deep, unnatural cold lifted. I stumbled into the tribal station an hour later, hypothermic and in shock. Old Man Turner was found 3 days later, wandering in a daze on his own property. He had no memory of the past week. He was alive, but he was cold. And he's always hungry now, no matter how much he eats. I know what I witnessed. A territorial dispute in a world just alongside our own. The Skinwalker wanted to wear me. The Wendigo wanted to consume me. And the only thing that saved me was the older, deeper magic of my grandmother's words and the fact that monsters, it seems, hate to share. 5 accounts. 5 brushes with entities that defy our understanding of the natural world. From the frozen, whispering hunger of the Wendigo to the cruel, deceptive theft of the Skinwalker, a common thread binds these stories: the violation of trust. Trust in our senses, in our environment, in the faces of those we know. These creatures are the embodiment of that betrayal. They remind us that the oldest maps still have edges labeled "Here there be monsters," and that those edges are not always on parchment. Sometimes, they are the tree line at the end of a dirt road, the mouth of an old mine, or the boundary of our own understanding. If you or someone you know has had an encounter in the gray places of this world, we invite you to share your story in the comments below. Your experience may be the key to understanding for another. If you found yourself holding your breath tonight, if the shadows in your room seemed just a little deeper, consider subscribing to Nightbound Bloodline. Tap the bell so you won't miss our next descent into the unknown. Thank you for listening. Remember, the woods are never empty. The night is never silent. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.